Girl here, Emily Ingram, is a serial Commonwealth citizen, hailing from London by way of Sydney, Australia, and the United Colonies of America, she calls them. She plans to pursue a career in journalism. This fall she will be beginning a double master's degree in what sounds to me like training for the Olympics and the Tour de France at the same time, in international relations at Columbia University and the London School of Economics. Emily Ingram.
I'm going to be reading the opening of a short story I've written called Herb of Grace. Penny was vacuuming when George entered the dining room, holding a pack of frozen peas to his head. She pretended not to see him as she dragged the hoover across the parquet wooden floor, occasionally whacking chair legs because she wasn't being too careful. A few years ago she would have felt sorry for George, who had such bad hay fever every year from the neighbours' willow trees, and whose allergic reactions often resulted in migraines that could last anywhere between 1 and 3 days. The problem with George was that he refused to take any medication or visit a doctor, so Penny's patience had worn thinner and thinner until the night in question, when she had decided to hoover the dining room because he was in bed with a migraine. "Do you have to do the vacuuming now?" George shouted over the zooming and flapping noises. Penny smiled out of the corner of her mouth, furthest away from her husband, the side he couldn't see. She slowly bent down and turned off the machine. "I'm sorry, darling, I really am. I didn't know it was a bad one," she said. George turned around and trudged back upstairs. Penny picked up the hoover and put it into its cupboard. In the kitchen, Penny checked that tonight's dinner was still marinating nicely. The salmon with spring onions and chopped ginger sat on the shelf in the fridge. She smelled the mixture and added a little more sesame oil and soy sauce. The rice was in the cooker. Penny hoped she would not have to eat alone. She made a cup of red tea and went into the next room. On the desk there were knitting needles and watercolour brushes lying next to each other, while sprigs of herbs and flowers signified her recent foray into the world of botany. A leather-bound Complete Shakespeare still lay open at the page where she had stopped reading Hamlet, the first play Penny had tried. George's migraines had forced her to take up several hobbies. She picked up a copy of Alpine Plants of Europe, and after searching the desk for some time, found a purple bell-shaped flower in the shape, on a piece of paper that said Savoy, France, 16th of July. Although it had nearly been a year since she'd picked this sample during a weekend hiking in the Alps with George, Penny remembered its vibrant colour and the crumbling rock it had been growing on. She had pressed the flower in a notebook in her handbag, even though her hobby at the time had been learning French. The only reason had been that the flower was such a beautiful little thing. Holding the pressed flower, which had darkened and dried flat since then, Penny felt a little sad that they hadn't planned any summer holidays yet. Hong Kong was unbearably hot in the summer months, and she was hoping they might go to Australia or New Zealand, where it was technically winter, although never too cold. They didn't have enough money for another trip to the Alps yet. Nestling amongst the chosen screen material in the trough are rosettes of narrow, lanceolate grey, hairy leaves. From each of these rosettes, short 3 to 4 centimetre stems carry a single, occasionally 2, semi-erect flower. In its best forms, these flowers can be immense, reminiscent of Canterbury tales in hues ranging from a slate of blue and pale lavender to the most gorgeous satiny purple. Penny wrote the words Camanula alpestris next to the flower and set it back onto the table. Although the alpine flowers are pretty, she was more interested in ones she could grow in her garden. By this she meant mostly herbs and vegetables that she might be able to cook with, although she was also on the lookout for ornamental flowers that might be able to grow in the dry soil of the front yard. "Penny," she heard George's voice coming from the kitchen. She stood up abruptly and peeped into the kitchen. George was bent over with his head inside the fridge. "Not wearing your glasses tonight," she said. "No, they make my headaches worse, remember?" George's voice echoed from inside of the fridge. "It's salmon with spring onions," she said. George murmured approval and they began to eat. George's migraine had gone away, and he seemed to be in a good mood. "I think the cat next door is making my allergies worse," he said. Penny remembered how she had kept the leftover swordfish from the night before and put it on the back porch for the neighbour's tomcat. It was a beautiful cat, with tortoiseshell fur and a white underside. She did not know its name. Although she had never told George, Penny looked forward to playing with the cat whenever it came to eat the leftovers. She could never invite the cat inside the house, though, because George could always tell where it had been. He could sense it, he told her, because his nose and eyes always ran. "I've heard," he said, "that there are some plants you can put in your garden that cats don't like." Penny peered down at the salmon on her plate. It was the 5th time they'd had fish that week, and she wondered whether they were at risk of mercury poisoning. Plants would be better than chicken wire to keep them out, wouldn't they, darling? He said. George was looking at her with a concerned look on his face. She could see that he didn't want to upset her. Of course, darling. I'll do some research to see which plants they are, she said. They finished their dinner and passed the rest of the night playing chess. They each won once. George let her win the second game. That night, Penny couldn't sleep. She got up several times to go to the bathroom and complained that she was too hot and then too cold. George pretended to sleep so he didn't have to listen to her moan about it. In the morning, she announced that she was pregnant. What? Are you sure? He asked. Absolutely sure, she said. I've done 4 tests. George felt nauseous. When he told her he felt nauseous, she shouted at him and told him that she should be the one who was feeling nauseous, being pregnant and all. He then told her that his nauseous was from the butterflies in his stomach because he was just so excited that she was pregnant. It only feels like nausea, he said. Haven't you ever had butterflies that are so intense that you feel as if you might vomit? George gave her a kiss on the forehead and went downstairs to make breakfast.